Hello and welcome. This is Business Breakthroughs Podcast. My name is Diane Fulmer, your host. I'm the founder of DE Fulmer LLC, a marketing agency offering book editing, copywriting, and consultation services so busy business owners can bring their authentic stories to their audience to connect, build relationships, and increase their sales. In the description box or show notes, you'll find some links to connect with me. If you want to sponsor an episode, please reach out. Thank you for your support. This is an interview-style podcast where we talk to business owners about their origin stories and lessons learned. You'll get to realize you're not alone, and we've all been there at some point. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Comment below and let us know your thoughts on this episode. With that out of the way, let's get started. On today's episode, we have Devin Tracy. Devin Tracy is Chief Marketing Officer of Windfall Elite, a marketing agency that helps companies get found on Google and has helped over 1,100, actually 1,111 currently, clients in the past 6 years. Hi, and welcome. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm actually really excited about this because I did a lot of content last year, but this is the first podcast that I've been on this year. I've been just head down grinding. So I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, well, we're excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. Can you tell me some more about yourself and what led you to start a business?
I think what led me to start a business is foundationally, the honest answer is probably it's a personality typing. I'm probably just hardwired to be an entrepreneur because thinking back, my entire life was very entrepreneurial in nature. My first plan in high school was that I was going to go as far as I could with martial arts, and I was going to get a degree in kinesiology so that I could have a certification saying that I know how to get in shape. And then after I went as far as I could in martial arts, whether that was a couple amateur fights locally or whether that was UFC champion, I was going to go as far as I could. Then I was going to turn around and open a gym. And so my plan always was to be a business owner. That plan changed when I got injured at 18, and that ended my martial arts career. And was to the degree of like, oh, it's not that I can turn around and train. I can't coach because doing anything is too painful. So I've kind of always had an entrepreneurial leaning. For a season of my life, I actually thought that I've never been involved in a multi-level marketing company like Amway or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was 18, I met somebody who was actually relatively successful in Amway. And so they tried to show me Amway. I didn't join, but seeing like their approach to life and business kind of inspired me to a degree of I can probably do that. And for a while, I thought that was the catalyst that inspired my entrepreneurship. But looking back, I realized, no, I was already entrepreneurial. I just had a different direction I was thinking it was going to go. So I think that it's just hardwired in. I think that it's just in my DNA. And I think any other explanation that I give is probably anecdotal, and I don't know if it's true or not.
So you've always been interested in kind of going your own way, carving your own path.
Yes. And to the degree, like, it's been really, really comforting in the last couple of years when I hit a wall and I'm struggling and I'm stressed out of my mind and I don't want anything that I'm doing today, to remind myself that's not true. Actually, I do want this. I picked this. And I continue picking it every time I go to the office rather than applying for a job. This was my choice. As soon as I enter that frame and I remind myself of that, I then say, and I still choose this. And I'm going to go do that because I'd rather make less money doing more work on my own. For those that don't know, I actually have over 9,000 hours of teaching experience. I was a teacher for a long time before I went full-time into business, and I loved teaching. And so the balance is always, would I go back to teaching? And the answer is probably not. I don't see the reality where I do that. Maybe on the trajectory of either teaching a course at a college level or maybe on the trajectory of like a retirement plan. But for the most part, every time I remind myself that I could actually make a decent living doing something else, I'm always like, no, we're going to grind this out.
Yeah, you make a really good point about when you make a commitment to something, that commitment isn't just made once, it's made every single day. And it's more about the discipline and not the motivation. It's reminding yourself that you get to do this every day because you chose it. And I think that was a really great point that you made. So we talked about what inspired you to get started in business and make that leap, because you've sort of already been doing that for most of your life. In that process, what have you learned and who helped along the way or who inspired you?
That's a big question. So who inspired me? I think that I actually lean on a lot of different people. In more recent years, my aunt's been a bigger inspiration than she was initially. My aunt owns a paintball field and is very successful
Mm,
at the paintball field. And that's the only like business owner, entrepreneur in my family. So as I've gotten more into this being my full-time endeavor, because I
mhm,
had a side business while I was teaching, I've leaned on her wisdom more and more. And that's been she's been a consistent inspiration and support. And I think outside of that, like there's
mhm.
just I could probably list a dozen different mentors and coaches that I've either paid for or partnered with over the years that have been valuable to me. I think that I probably, even when I very first started, had this mindset of if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to get around people who were ideally notably more successful than me, ideally in the same exact industry. So I was always willing to pay for that if that's what it took. I actually would be a strong advocate, by the way, that like paying for a mentor is probably a wise investment. Now, I say probably because there's a lot of charlatans out there, so you got to make sure that
Yeah.
they're a person worth paying attention to, and that's kind of hard to
Mhm.
discern sometimes because good marketers might not be good people, but if they're good
Yeah.
marketers, it's hard to tell. But a lot of time, I've probably spent I spent over $100,000 on mentorship, and I think over half of it was a good investment, and the other half was what it took to find the good ones.
That's a great point too, with what it takes to find the good ones and then the good ones.
But when you look at it
All
in
adds
that
up.
frame and you think of it as like this is just me paying for my own education,
Yes.
um, my actual college degree cost more than I've spent on mentorship, and so from that perspective, it's like okay, I'm paying about what college costs, and
Hmm.
when I paid for something that ended up not being worth having paid for, well, that's a lesson learned, and
Yep.
that perspective kind of detaches you from it on an emotional level. And I've even had things happen in my life where I'm just like, well, I could be mad at them, or I could be mad at myself, or I could just
Mhm.
recognize this as a lesson and not make the same mistake again and move on.
Yep.
And that's the frame that tends to be healthiest. It's like,
Yes.
all right, I've learned something. And
Yeah.
honestly, I can be grateful that I learned something. It wasn't what I wanted to learn,
Yeah.
but I learned something. So,
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, you either win or you learn, I've heard. So,
yes, I like that a lot. In the early days in my business, I repeated that mantra constantly. I win or I learn, I don't lose. And I think more recently, I've actually slightly shifted it. Same basic principle, but what I find myself saying a lot now is either my business is growing or I am.
okay.
So it's like something's growing, so everything's good. And all the problems and all the hardships, and we'll probably talk about some today, I'm assuming, but everything that goes wrong is like, no, this isn't something going wrong. This is a lesson. I'm growing so that my business can grow in the next season. Everything's positive. You just don't always know how it's positive.
Mm, yeah. That's incredible. So, I think it's a good time for a few brief breakthroughs. What's a mistake that people make?
Hmm. So I think you can kind of categorize this at what stage of business they're in. If you are, let's say, like you're starting out, and let's say let's contextualize this a little bit so I can really speak to you. Let's say that
Mhm,
you're just starting out. Let's say that you are trying to do something that is fundamentally you can do it behind a computer. So you're doing a virtual service of some form, or um, maybe you're launching an e-commerce store or something like that. You're doing something virtually, and a lot of times that's the right path to start. By the way, for most people, because
mhm,
most people don't have the financial backing to start a brick and mortar, and you can argue which one's better long term, but I think short term, doing having a virtual service based business like
mhm.
copyright, like
Yep.
SEO services. I think that's a brilliant way to start because your overhead is zero. And that
Mhm,
makes it a very healthy business to start when you're strapped for cash. So let's talk to that because that's what I can talk to. The biggest mistakes that I see in that like zero to launch or 0 to 6 figure range of like we're trying to get going, the biggest ones are always the same things. There's shiny object syndrome. So just not doing the same thing long enough. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the reality is the grass is not greener on the other side. It's greener where you water it, right?
Yeah.
So in my own life, like I've been an entrepreneur since I was 18 years old. And for the first several years, every 6 months, I was doing something different. And
Mm-hmm.
that cycle will never get you to a stable business. And the problem is everything looks easier than what you're currently doing
Mm-hmm.
because you don't understand it well enough to know what's wrong with it. And then when you get into something new and we get rewarded in the wrong way for doing the wrong thing, because as soon as you start something new, you're probably going to find that in the first month you're going to make a couple sales. Like it's really hard not to when you start something new and you're excited about it, and you're passionate, and you're reaching out to everybody you know. You're going to get a little bit of traction, and that little bit of traction is going to feel easier than the thing you were just doing, and so you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get rewarded for the wrong thing, and then you're going to jump ship, and then
Mm-hmm.
that gets hard. You're going to remember, and I mean this psychologically, not necessarily memory wise, but you're going to remember the dopamine hit of how easy it is when you jump ship. And so we reinforce these bad behaviors. And I see this all the time, and I did it myself a lot. And so when I was more in the realm of doing like business coaching and consulting, I had an entire framework that I built around figuring out what you should be doing, that when you want to jump ship, hopefully you will remember, I need to run it through this framework and see if it's worth the shift. And then you'll find
Mm-hmm.
it's not. Because you can build any business to a seven-figure business
Mm-hmm.
if it's the thing you stick at for 5 years. And if you're not willing to stick at it for 5 years, well, and it's 5 years, 5 years is somewhat arbitrary, but the point is like stick it out.
Mm-hmm.
You can build any business to a seven-figure business. You can build lawn care maintenance to 7 figures. So like you can build any
I have
business.
a cousin who did that. He's been in business since he was 14. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, can you really become a multi-billionaire selling something like Chinese food? I don't know. Ask Panda Express. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Yeah.
stick at something for long, but here's the trick: Panda Express has been in business for 40 years,
Yeah.
doing one thing for 40 years. So that's a big one. Shiny object syndrome is a huge mistake that I see constantly. I think most of the problems getting from 0 to 6 figures are psychological. They're in your own head. I think it's a lack of discipline. It's a lack of focus. I think it's weird how often people have this pattern of, and by people, I'm talking about myself. It's weird how often people have this pattern of finding something that works for like client acquisition and then not continuing to do it. And it's like, well, if that works, why would you ever stop? You shouldn't stop until it stops working, right? But so
Mm-hmm.
often it's like, oh, I did that thing and it worked really well. So why haven't you done it again? I don't know. Do more events if events works for you. Do more networking if that's got your business. Keep doing
Yeah.
it until it stops working. And so that's a big one. It's just lack of consistency on marketing,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people don't recognize that no matter what business you're in the business of marketing and sales. Every business can be broken down to in the first 6 figures. Like there are three things you are doing. You are doing marketing, you're doing sales, and you're doing fulfillment. To get to seven
Yes.
figures, you also need to do management of a team. But like marketing, sales, fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, no matter what you do, you need to be good enough at those three things to get a throughput. So, do you need to be the world's best salesman? No. But if your sales close is 0%, then you don't have a business. So
Yeah.
you need to sell enough. And do you need to be the world's best marketer? No. But if exactly 0 people know you're in business, then you're not.
Yeah.
And do you need to be, you don't even need to be amazing at what you do for fulfillment, especially initially. You won't be because you don't know what you're doing yet. But if you cannot fulfill, you won't have a business because everyone's going to tell everyone how you can't fulfill. So each of those things in the beginning, you don't need to be amazing at them, but you need to be proficient at them. And I think a lot of times business owners never learn marketing. And then when you ask them, well, how do you get most of your customers? They're like, well, I think word of mouth is probably it. And what that tells you is one of two things. Either one, they don't actually know how they're getting clients at all, because word of mouth isn't usually it, or like when you actually, or
Mm-hmm.
B, they're right, it's only word of mouth, and that's why they're struggling, because word of mouth doesn't scale very well. In most cases, especially with small businesses, they'll tell you word of mouth, and you look into it, and you're like, actually, no, you get your clients by networking. You just
Mm-hmm.
don't recognize that as a client acquisition channel. Or actually, no, you get your clients from your social media posting, but you
Mm-hmm.
don't think about that as marketing, so you don't recognize it as a way that you're getting clients. There's usually something else that they're not recognizing, Or actually, your website ranks on Google.
Yeah.
So you actually have SEO going for you. It's rare that word of mouth is the answer, but it's often that it's the answer because someone hasn't thought about marketing.
Ah.
Those are a lot of the big ones that I see in that early, like 0 to 6 figures. Most of it's mindset. I think getting from 6 to 7 figures, it's all about team management.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one. And I can't speak past what I just said. I'm not at 7 figures. So I can't speak past what I just said. But it seems to me that there are levels in business that once you get there, your job as the owner fundamentally changes. And
Mm.
and so it's good to recognize those patterns and see them, to ask yourself, how big do I actually want to grow? Because maybe
Mm-hmm.
I think that I want to have $100 million company, but then I realize what the owner of a $100 million company does. I think, okay, well, maybe the company can still grow there, but maybe it grows there without me as the CEO. Maybe it grows there,
Mm.
and as the founder, I actually just put myself into the job that I like and I hire CEOs anyway, because you can do
Mm-hmm.
that. But maybe you recognize that along the way, okay, well, when I'm just trying to get 6 figures, I can be everything. I don't need a team. But in order to get to 7 figures, I actually need a team probably. In most businesses, you'll need a team to get to 7 figures. And you're like, okay, so how big of a team do I need? Oh, I need 10 people. I need to manage 10 people. Well, I don't like
Mm-hmm.
it. I don't want to manage 10 people. Oh, and if I'm managing 10 people, then even though we're getting to 7 figures, my salary is the same. That's a lot of
Mm.
work that I don't like for the same salary. Maybe I'm happy with a 6 figure company. And I think those are just good things to think about, that your role does fundamentally change as you level up.
Wow. That was a whole mini course right there. Thank you so much, Devin.
Yeah, I realized, and I realized at some point I was like, I don't even know what the original question was. My
Oh, it
bad.
was
I'm probably
just
going
what's
off
a
script
mistake
here.
that people make, but I was going to let you keep going because that's just, I mean, I learned so much every time I talk to you, or I'll probably bring up your book at some point, but yeah, you just have a way of, I don't know if it's from being a teacher, of just sort of like, and you were a math teacher, so you organize the information in a way that is very helpful and educational, and I don't know. It's like a whole class. It's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it might be from being a teacher, although
Yeah.
I think fundamentally I would, the same way that I'm an entrepreneur by design, I think I'm a teacher by design, not by
Mhm.
experience. Because that was even when I started venturing into the entrepreneurial world, the very first thoughts I had were around, how can I help people be better people? And the answers to
Mhm.
that that I came to tended to consistently being very education based.
Yeah.
And I think that I've really struggled in my business to get away from coaching and consulting, because I just have such a deep passion for it. Um,
Yeah.
but to that, by the way, I'm very hard set right now. I will not be advertising coaching consulting services until my agency hits 7 figures. I'm not doing
Okay.
that. That is a hard rule that I set for myself. And effectively, um, when you're trying to do both, you can't really scale either. Is
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's the struggle that I had. And then as picking which one to focus in on, my position was very much, I'm not willing to just be a coach. I'm not willing to
Mm.
not be in the trenches and not be doing what I'm talking about. It feels unethical to me. So I
Yeah.
decided for the short term, I will build the 7 figures, and then I can build a team and remove myself enough that I could have time for coaching as well. And at that
Mhm.
point, rather than only being able to say, hey, let's get you from zero to launch, let's get you to $5,000 or $10,000 a month in revenue, I'll be able to say, I have experience building a 7 figure company. I can help you build a 7 figure company. And I think
Mhm.
that's a better sales pitch for a coach anyway. So that's kind of the path but I had to set a hard rule and like
Yeah.
write it out. I'm not allowing
Mhm.
myself to promote coaching or consulting until my agency is a 7 figure run rate. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of ways to define it. Like what's a 7 figure company? Well, technically it's a company that could sell for 7 figures. My definition that I'm using is 7 figures in annual revenue.
Okay.
So the profit doesn't need to be 7 figures in my mind, but the annual revenue needs to be 7 figures.
That makes sense. This episode was broken into parts, which you can find in the playlist. Thank you for listening.